We all know farming has changed. With new and ever-advancing technologies, American farming and ranching doesn't look like it used to. Across the country, in operations big and small, we're making choices that help keep agriculture sustainable for your grandchildren and ours. Our values are the same. We grow crops and raise livestock and poultry so you can raise families that are happy and healthy. And thanks to innovations in agriculture, we're feeding more people with fewer resources. With innovation come questions, and we're here with answers. So let's talk. From basic terminology so you can speak the same language and ask the right questions, to complex topics like environmental impact and GMOs. Food dialogues exist to provide answers to your questions about food, straight from the people who produce it. So get to know who we are, how we work, and why we love what we do.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined this week by Agri-Pulse's Sara Wyant, and we are on location this week in Phoenix as Agri-Pulse is doing a double duty of sorts. I'm here covering the Cattle Industry Convention in Phoenix, and Sara is nearby in Scottsdale covering a meeting of the nation's crop insurance industry. So a lot of on-the-road activity for Agri-Pulse this week, as is the case between that January and March timeframe, because who knew? Tractors don't like to go in the field in January. So apparently farmers need to go to Phoenix and Orlando, and we don't complain because we get to go too. But there was some news that happened this week in Washington. Earlier this week, President Trump delivered his State of the Union address, touched on a number of topics critically important to agriculture, that being trade, infrastructure, immigration, to name a few. Did not directly address agriculture or farm policy. Would not necessarily a surprise, but Sara, a lot of real tangential connections to agriculture policy in the things that were discussed.
Well, absolutely. Obviously, immigration reform is very important to so many people that are on farms and ranches today. Tax reform is going to be very important as we see the new paychecks come out for folks that have off-farm jobs, as well as those that are trying to get a little extra money to invest in this economy in their farm and ranch. The regulatory relief that was described in terms of the different regulations that the president has rolled back and continues to emphasize. We've surveyed people, Spencer, and whether they're Republican or Democrat, if they've got their own business like farmers and ranchers do, that's hugely important to repeal some of the red tape that folks feel has really been hampering their success in their operations.
Mm-hmm. So we saw a number of things President Trump discussed in that State of the Union address, calling for some congressional action on some things as well. He asked for Congress to work on an infrastructure package of about $1.7 trillion with leveraging private and local government funding as well. So we'll watch throughout the course of 2018 as the year unfolds and see what kind of policy action is taken on Capitol Hill in the executive branch on some of those activities. But I want to discuss some things that are going on at the meetings that are happening that Sara and I are attending right now. And Sara, you said that you were able to get some information from some Department of Agriculture officials as well as some folks in the private sector, really looking forward to what could happen throughout the rest of the year in the crop insurance industry.
Absolutely. There's crop insurance meetings starting this week in Scottsdale and running into next week. And the industry knows that farmers see crop insurance as really the very key point of the farm safety net these days. But they're worried. They're worried about amendments, especially on the Senate, that were successful the last time we did a farm bill. They're worried about other ways that the administration might come in and propose cuts. There was a recent report that outlined several different ways that we might make some trims and adjustments in crop insurance. And so they're trying to look at how to do a better job communicating the value of crop insurance to lawmakers on Capitol Hill. And that's difficult. As Mary Kay Thatcher presented this morning, only about 34 congressional districts are truly 50% or more rural. And there are a lot more districts that are 100% urban. And so trying to have that balance of why it's important to have crop insurance as a safety net. Senate Ag Committee Chairman Pat Roberts talks about this all the time. He's tried to make sure that President Trump understands the importance, but we still expect the president's budget, when it comes out, now expected February 12th, to propose further cuts in crop insurance and other farm safety net programs. So the industry is cautiously watching, trying to see what they can do to better educate people about the value of these programs.
And here at the Cattle Industry Convention that I'm covering here in Phoenix, a lot of things have been happening in Washington, D.C. that have been critically important issues for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, which is, of course, one of the groups that puts on this convention, including earlier this week, we saw Administrator Scott Pruitt announce that he's looking to finalize a Waters of the U.S. rule by the end of the year. Also announced a 2-year delay of the effective date of Waters of the U.S., and so that's something to continue following. Also, we saw some big news come off of Capitol Hill this week, or really even just today, earlier this morning, as Senator Jeff Flake has announced he will be lifting his hold on Greg Dowd to be the chief ag negotiator with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. That's something that was widely cheered by NCBA members when it was announced here at this convention. A big policy priority for NCBA and a number of other ag groups, obviously, is the continuation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, renegotiation ongoing at this point, but a lot of ag groups nervous about potentially losing that deal, and so getting Greg Dowd to the table is something that is very important for them as they look to advance agriculture's agenda at NAFTA negotiations.
I can't say enough how important it is to have Greg there at the table. And we've seen this again and again, Republican senators blocking Republican nominees. We've got one more with Bill Northey that doesn't seem to be any place near being lifted right now, but having Greg at the table for these crucial agricultural negotiations, whether it's NAFTA, whether it's Chorus, whether it's just the day-to-day business of trying to expand trade in the United States, is crucially important. And so it's long overdue, and kudos to NCBA and all the other folks who have been working tirelessly, and I'd have to say Republicans and Democrats have been trying to lift up Greg's nomination and advance it. And I know Senator Moran suggested today that perhaps it will be something that he will push for as soon as he gets back on Monday.
So now the attention does turn to getting the full Senate to confirm that nomination. If Senator Flake is going to lift his hold, that means presumably that nomination could travel through the Senate by unanimous consent. It's a matter of time. We'll have to see when Senator McConnell decides to move that nomination. Certainly something to watch in the coming weeks. Also this week, something that happened earlier today was a court in D.C. Offering a delay, or excuse me, a new effective date on CERCLA, which is better known as the Superfund law. Some concern about whether or not livestock operations would have to declare their farms as Superfund sites, essentially, due to the result of a lawsuit. Working on standalone legislation to possibly or hopefully avoid that, if you're in the case of NCBA. Do have Democratic co-sponsorship on that bill now in the form of Indiana Democrat Joe Donnelly, looking to attract more, but hoping to drop legislation on that next week, we're told. And so that's a lot of things that are really key to NCBA's policy provisions have been happening while their policy team is in Phoenix. And so I don't think they're necessarily complaining about the geographic difference there, but a lot of things happening there, and some things that we want to keep an eye on going into next week. As I'm sure astute viewers of Agri-Pulse and broader governmental content are aware, government funding expires at the end of next week. As Sarah mentioned, Senator Jerry Moran is in Phoenix this week addressing members of NCBA and attendees of the Cattle Industry Convention, and he seems optimistic that a government shutdown could potentially be avoided.
He seems very optimistic. He explained he's an optimist by nature, so I suppose that's just like all of us farm kids, Spencer. You know, you get up every morning and you think the sun shines and anything is possible. But as Senator Moran explained, he does not believe that there's the political will right now to have another government shutdown. He thinks that the Republicans learned that the hard way when they shut down the government in 2013. The Democrats also learned that recently when they tried to shut down the government over immigration reform. And so there's a real willingness right now to try to come together, to try to find a path forward. So I think his expectation is that there will be a big agreement cut, but also a need for another continuing resolution. So it gives the staff time to go make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed so that they can actually get the legislation written and then get this deal put together before the DACA expiration date in March. So he's still very optimistic. I think that represents the sentiment that we've heard from other members that we've talked to while we've been here, that there is really a focus on trying to get the job done on behalf of the American people. And obviously, I'm sure with all the farmers and ranchers you've been talking to here, they don't really understand why you have to have a government shutdown. They just want people to go to work and get the job done.
Mm-hmm. So something to follow throughout the course of next week, because as things sit right now with no congressional action, the government will shut down at the end of next week, but a number of lawmakers optimistic that that won't be the case. So I think that's going to do it for this week. Certainly a lot of information and tidbits happening in Phoenix and in Washington, D.C. and across the country, really, in the broad scope of agricultural policy. But we'll be sure to keep an eye on all of it here at agripulse.com and do our best to keep you informed. But I think that's going to do it for this week. For Sara Wyant, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.